Namaskar and a very warm evening to the distinguished dignitaries, respected faculty members, and dear students. It is said that freedom of the seas is the foundation of global peace and commerce. With this thought in mind, it is my pleasure to welcome all to day 3 of the International Speaker Series hosted by Faculty of Law, GLS University. The series continues to provide a platform for international academic engagements, knowledge exchange, and meaningful dialogues between scholars and students worldwide. We begin today's program with the welcome address, and it is my privilege to invite Dr. Mayuri H. Pandya, Dean, Faculty of Law, GLS University. Ma'am is a distinguished academician and expert member of the Environment Appellant Authority, Government of Gujarat, who also contributes to the Ministry of Environment, Forest and Climate Change Appellant Committee at the national level to inaugurate today's session. Ma'am, over to you for the welcome address.
Thank you, Vidita. A very warm welcome to Dr. Daniel, all my budding lawyers, my colleagues, and everyone who has joined today on this virtual platform. I welcome you to day 3 of this International Speaker Series, Global Juris Connect. The series continues to serve as a platform for engaging with complex global legal issues through diverse perspectives and comparative scholarship. Over the past 2 days, we have explored critical dimensions of contemporary legal challenges, beginning with the climate change and forced migration, followed by the discussion on the renewable energy arbitration within the German contract law. The series has progressively highlighted how the law responds to evolving global realities. Today's session marks a significant shift to the domain of international maritime law, particularly in context of increasing geopolitical complexities. We are honored to welcome Dr. Daniel Stein, lecturer, International Maritime Law Institute, Malta, who will be speaking on the freedom of the navigation in the era of geopolitical tensions. Dear students, you are well aware that the maritime routes are central to the global trade, security, and diplomacy. And today's topic assumes immense relevance with it. The session promises to offer the valuable insights to the legal principles governing the freedom of navigation and the challenges posed by the contemporary geopolitical developments. So, it's all the budding lawyers that your enthusiastic participation continues to enrich this series. Through such engagements, we aim to broaden your understanding of international legal regimes, and we wish to encourage your critical engagement with the emerging global issues. I once again warmly welcome each one of you and wish you a thought-provoking session today. Thank you. Over to Ritita.
Thank you, ma'am, for the inspiring opening remarks. It is my honor to introduce Professor Daniel Stein, lecturer at the International Maritime Law Institute, Malta, and Associate Professor at Jindal Global Law School, OP Jindal Global University. Professor Stein is an associate professor where he contributes to teaching and research in public and international laws. Sir holds a Juris Doctor degree from Tulane Law School, Louisiana, with specialized certificates in Admiralty law and alternative dispute resolution. Professor Stein's academic instructions include core and elective courses such as Law of Torts and Consumer Affairs, Public International Law, Comparative Maritime Law, and Comparative Law in Action. His research spans key domains including maritime law, environmental law, international law, and peaceful settlement of international disputes, and methods of alternative dispute resolution, including negotiation, mediation, and conciliation. Sir has served as a visiting researcher at the Ferrer University Berlin and has delivered lectures on maritime conciliation at the Tulane Law School ADR summer program hosted by Humboldt University in Berlin. Professor Stein's scholarship has been published in esteemed forums covering topics such as environmental constitutionalism, India's engagement with the International Tribunal for the Law of the Seas advisory proceedings on climate change, and environmental shipbreaking practices in India. Sir, we are privileged to have you with us. And today, Sir would be talking on freedom of navigation in the era of geopolitical tensions. Sir, over to you from our end.
All right. Great to be here. I was at OP Jindal for 5 years. I only went to Ahmedabad once. I know it is a major center for maritime law with GMU there, and was lucky enough to be able to lecture to the Navy on what at the time was the biodiversity beyond national jurisdiction treaty that was still being negotiated, and now it actually just came into force last month. So very exciting to be there and to be here. Really, Malta has a significant Indian population. In fact, the Indian High Commissioner to Malta will be visiting our institute this afternoon, so I might get to see her and say hello. And it's great to be able to address an important topic like this. Freedom of navigation itself has several different applications. So if there is something pressing on your mind that I am not getting to, please let me know in the comments. Freedom of navigation applies. There's a special regime for warships. There's freedom of navigation that is more for passage through straits. Some of that we'll talk about, and some of it is about freedom of fishing that I will get to. So the way that I will talk, and I have no slides, the most thing that I think would be helpful that I couldn't really figure out how to give was a map, but I think a lot of these locations in Southeast Asia especially will either be known to you guys or you'll be able to look it up on your own, and I will do my best to describe it. The way I'll proceed is we'll talk sort of what is freedom of navigation in present international law using the Law of the Sea Convention. And then I'm going to go back and go through sort of the historical development of this freedom of navigation. I'm going to rely heavily on a book that if you have already read, great, more power to you. Otherwise, it is my honor to introduce the scholarship of R.P. Anand, whose incredible contributions to Indian international law, to third world approaches to international law. He unfortunately died 10, 15 years ago. He was a professor emeritus at JNU at the time. He was throughout the Third Law of the Sea Convention, a consultant to the UN Secretary General, and wrote several papers throughout this period in the 1970s when UNCLOS was being negotiated. including a paper called Winds of Change in the Law of the Sea, and then a 1982 book called Origin and Development of the Law of the Sea. I am going to cite heavily from this book. I encourage you, let's see, I can see you now. So if you have heard of this book, raise your hands. Have you even heard of this book? Okay, great. Well, I will encourage you to find it at the library. There's PDFs available online. It is an incredible book. Those of you with interests in international law, and even if those of you who are interested in third world approaches to international law, he sort of pioneered this, and the people who are alive today cite heavily to his work. And I think reintroducing yourselves to his scholarship is an incredible opportunity. I learned so much from reading his book. He was around at the time when IMLI, where I am, the International Maritime Law Institute, was founded. The Secretary General of the International Maritime Organization at the time as well, Srivastava, was the only Indian Secretary General as well. So through his work and through Srivastava as well, and then there was one more other Indian gentleman at the time, P.K. Mukherjee, perhaps, who were, I would say, foundational in setting up this this institute where people from all over the world come to learn in detail about international maritime law. We have 2 Indian students right now. One is a Coast Guard officer, and I'll just talk about IMLI a little bit at the start. It sort of exists to do capacity building with the recognition that much of international maritime law is a Western construct, is the result of formerly British law that was forced on the colonies and its former Commonwealth countries trying to catch up. And through the IMO itself, which is of course based in London, we here in Malta get practitioners, scholars from all over the world to come learn more about these international maritime law instruments, learn why they exist, and help integrate them into their national legal systems. So be happy to chat with you more about that, but let's get into freedom of navigation, right? So UNCLOS itself makes a lot of references to freedom of navigation. UNCLOS, UN Convention of Law of the Sea. We have Article 36, freedom of navigation in straits. Article 58, freedom of navigation in exclusive economic zones. Articles 78 and 87 about freedom of navigation in the high seas. There's UNCLOS itself introduced a regime for archipelagic states. The island countries of Southeast Asia needed a specific regime to deal with how they could and could not regulate ships that were passing through Indonesia's waters, the waters of the Philippines. Should your ship have to go all the way around if you are navigating it? But what rules can be put only on going through these territories? I mean, that topic itself sort of could be its own talk on freedom of navigation in archipelagic states. There's the convention topics as well, but it certainly came up in, and maybe I will mention this again at the end, in the modern structure about when, why, and how those spaces can be closed. So the regime of UNCLOS, I don't know if you guys have taken Law of the Sea course, but it essentially sets out different maritime zones where coastal states have a decreasing amount of power or jurisdiction from the baseline out into the high seas. There is a zone of territorial waters, of contiguous waters, of exclusive economic waters, and then potentially under it is a shelf, a continental shelf that can be used for extractive activities. There are a handful of qualifications that are included in, here's my copy of, or our copy of the Law of the Sea Convention in Article 19 about innocent passage. Maybe I will do this backwards. So part of the dispute at UNCLOS itself was countries wanting to expand the area off their coasts for different activities. How far off the coast should you be able to enforce your national law? And should your national law be able to, how much can it be different from international law? And so an example you might think of is with oil tankers. So following some very severe oil spills in the late 1980s, much of the international community, or some countries, wanted to shift from single-hulled vessels to double-hulled vessels, right? You add an extra hull so the ship is safer, right? Great idea. But I think this is a helpful way to think about the power that you want to grant coastal states, right? We can't really have one country, even if your country was the victim of a severe oil spill, you don't want to have that one country be able to say, we are adopting the law that says we are only going to allow double-hulled oil tankers into our territorial seas. Right? So even if you are worried about oil pollution, even if you think that oil should not be transported as much on the sea, even if you think that oil is this big pollutant, having one country be able to set international law in such a way is really a hindrance to this freedom of navigation, right? You want and need all types of cargo, not just oil, to be able to go around the world. And if one country is able to set rules for what they are and are not going to allow in their either territorial seas and within, I'll say 12 miles, the max is 12 miles, or in their contiguous zone, we start to have a lot of problems, right? So these limits on a lot of this freedom of navigation is what you can do within the territorial sea when you are going to be within 12 miles of the coast. Okay? So some of it is just this passage regime. And then some of it is also the, as a result of going from 3 miles to 12 miles, the problem that straits used for international navigation would come under the jurisdiction of coastal states. And so this, I don't think India really has a problem with this. The only strait that is in the area are the Palk Straits between Sri Lanka, and those straits are not navigable by large vessels, right? Has anyone been down there to, what is down there, Rameshwaram, Dhanushkodi? No, has anyone traveled down there? No, you should. Yeah, a couple of people. It's pretty cool. I was down there a couple of years ago. I didn't get into the water or cross to the other side, but that's sort of really the only strait that matters in and around India, but it was still a major international concern of the freedom of navigation through these straits used for international navigation. And so we have these section 2 of the UNCLOS is territorial sea. Section 3 is, no, sorry. Part 3 is straits used for international navigation. So this regime of allowing innocent passage through these straits was part of what took 10 years to negotiate. So we have our freedom of navigation, and through this we have a couple of other issues that I might come back to. Through archipelagic states, the role of warships, the capacity of warships, right? It says warship. Is its passage innocent or is it prejudicial to the interests of the state? Submarines as well, right? Submarines was not a really ancient concern, so part of that had to be dealt with. And then the question, we're talking about freedom of navigation. When do we also mean freedom to fish anywhere, right? So much of navigation, and when we get into the history of it, is about closing off some of these channels or acting as if your Navy can prevent people from entering or can dictate what kinds of ships you are allowing, what kinds of cargo. It's different than letting people into a port. This is letting anyone use the ocean area. And the question might come up again about fishing vessels. So we'll talk a little bit about this freedom to fish, right? It's a little different than moving cargo from point A to point B, I'll say from Southeast Asia to Europe. It is about your freedom to fish anywhere. How important is that? So that is our freedom of navigation. It is innocent passage. It is not prejudicial to the rights or interests of the coastal state. And we'll go through it in a little bit more detail with the context. And then this second half, what do we mean by this era of geopolitical tension? So I'll definitely talk about some of the modern stuff that we are dealing with, the US strikes in the Caribbean. Is there a dispute about freedom of navigation in the Arctic? And there was some news just yesterday that the Iranian government was closing the Straits of Hormuz for a live fire incident, right? The Straits of Hormuz connect a sea area to the high seas, but I think all of that sort of relates to the present geopolitical tension. But have we ever not been in an era of geopolitical tension, right? You guys have, I am too afraid to ask how young you guys are, but so much of the national security landscape that exists in Southeast Asia is a result of the US, where I'm from, being attacked on September 11th, 2001. 2001. And raise your hand if you were born after September 11th, 2001, right? That's most of you. And so most of your lives have been in this security infrastructure that the US has built as a response to these attacks, right? With the US government in Afghanistan, with the tension of terrorist ties with Pakistan is not relatively new for you guys, but it's sort of this whole US military structure, we have a couple of international law instruments about ways why and how the US or ships can board your vessel at sea as a result of 9/11, the suppression of unlawful acts at sea of 2005, right? Some of these instruments only exist because of September 11th. But let's go back even further. Actually, let me say one more thing first in the introduction. So much of, rather than coastal state jurisdiction, so much of who exercises jurisdiction on the oceans is the flag state. And so ships fly a flag, and the flag state has primary jurisdiction for most things. And so we're only talking about these limited circumstances where the coastal state, the port state, not even the port, the coastal state where the ship is passing might have some powers. Otherwise, everything is within the flag state. Okay, so let's see. Where am I going from here? Um, so the in Anand's book, he traces the this history of the law of the sea to the ancient Roman control of the Mediterranean. If you look at maps of the territory of the Roman Empire, you will see it spans around the entire Mediterranean. So, was this an issue when it was all under Roman rule? Could other nations trade in the Mediterranean, places where the Roman Empire did not control? Were they able to sail in the Mediterranean? And this freedom of navigation existed in those times. Likewise, with the historical fishing in Asia, what was the name of that ship? There was this ancient wooden boat that was recently rebuilt and sailed from Gujarat to Oman. I can, the name of the ship escapes me, I can look it up. But it is this sort of historical 6th century, 5th, 6th, 7th century. There was, of course, maritime traffic between Europe, Africa, and Asia throughout the Indian Ocean from, I would say, 500 BCE. Down in Goa, there are remnants of the old Jewish community, and I just sent this photo to a friend. Let me use this. And so people were coming from the Middle East to Goa as early as 1000 BC, trade between King Solomon's kingdom and the Malabar coast. So you can sort of see this photo is up in Goa. Not exactly a slide, but and then in that same South Indian region, St. Thomas is alleged to have sailed there right around 0 BC. Right, there were even the Srivijaya kings in the 7th century were called the lords of the ocean, but this freedom of seas and freedom of navigation for all was never interfered with, controlled, or monopolized. As far back as you can go, you will not find any of the ancient sea powers engaging in anything hindering the freedom of navigation. Why? Well, some of it is because it is still very dangerous. Even at the time, people there, you might have one captain who is at the heart of the venture, but if you choose to work on a boat, this is your own personal decision, and why should your life be put in danger because of that, right? Let people sail, let people trade, setting yourself up and your Navy, one, the sea is very large, and so your ability to stop and police all of these vessels requires a lot of manpower, a lot of sea power, a lot of ships. It is just not worth it. But one, because trade is important. And being able to facilitate this trade and wanting to take advantage of the international trade, the nascent international trade that exists in the 7th, 8th, 9th, 10th century, right? You can't be attacking merchant ships, right? You can't be making it unsafe for certain merchants to visit your coasts. It simply does not make any sense. But even in the earliest travelogues of the great Marco Polo and Ibn Battuta, who published these very famous travel diaries of their voyages to the Far East, none of them mentioned any hindrances to free navigation, right? It's all about free trade. It's all about the freedom of navigation. in the 15th century, the Arab supremacy comes from the Middle East through India to Southeast Asia, but again, never tries to exercise naval control. Part of this is because navies were for merchants, right? They were about getting your goods from point A to port B. Land power was all that was important militarily, right? To move an entire army by sea, it was difficult, it was costly, it was not worth it in these early days. Now, I'll say in the 15th century and into the 16th century, we start to get a little bit of the pushback in freedom of navigation. And some of the pushback that exists occurs in the Straits of Malacca. And so in going northwest from Singapore, you have Singapore itself, and then Malacca, and then essentially Kuala Lumpur. And these straits connect the Indian Ocean with, I'll say, the South China Sea. And so all of the commerce that needed to go from East Asia into the Indian Ocean and then to Europe by sea needed to go through these straits. And so the importance of these straits led to the buildup of the city of Malacca, the kingdoms there, allowing it to exist as a port state. Anand says that right around 1400, there were some attempts by Malacca to patrol the area, but they completely disappeared. Now, is this, right, we're not quite in an era of geopolitical tension, but as you guys know from your public international law course, the fall of the Eastern Roman Empire and the cutting off of the land route between Europe and India and the rest of Asia led to this increase of the importance of shipping. And so the Portuguese were sort of the first to sail around the Cape of Good Hope, around Africa and make it to India. They were the first to really take it, or the first, I'll say, European powers. Obviously, Africans, Gujaratis, Middle Easterners who were doing this for centuries, for decades, but the Portuguese were the first to really, the first European power to, as you guys know, arrive and colonize Goa just before 1500, and then from Goa, using Goa as their base, expand their operation into Malacca and then into the islands of Southeast Asia. And it is this attempt to control the trade of spices, this attempt to monopolize the trade of spices beyond Portuguese border on the other side of the world, really led to this first explosion of Western thought on the freedom of navigation. And to say that, right, this is the era of geopolitical tensions, right? The Arctic, the Caribbean, the Middle East. To compare that against the constant warfare of late 1500s and early 1600s and then 17th century Europe, when the law of the sea really developed, when these European powers were warring constantly, right? 1618 to 1648, we have the 30 Years' War. We have 3 wars against the Dutch. We have Portugal coming under the yoke of Spain, although I guess that was because the Portuguese king died without an heir. But at the time, right, Charles V, King of Spain, had this large empire, and then the Dutch wanted freedom and fought for freedom. And we are still, this is the era that Vasco da Gama discovers discovers Goa, right? He was the first person who was ever there, right? No one had ever been to Goa before Vasco da Gama, right? He didn't complete. So, but da Gama's route itself was very treacherous. Anand recounts how where's this quote? He plundered committed several acts of piracy in order to claim to be sovereign and right to have monopoly on the spice trade. He pirated this Khoja Qasim ship of Calicut that was returning from Mecca, plundering it whole. And so the Mughal era at the time did not have a navy. Who was going to stop him? This is around this era where the Portuguese, by the end of 1500, are attempting to sign treaties with the Malabar Empire and the kingdoms of Southeast Asia to grant them exclusive control. I heard a fantastic story that down in Trivandrum, their palm trees very famously were used as makeshift cannons. And so they only had a few cannons that were capable of reaching the Portuguese and then eventually Dutch ships that were coming close. And so what they did was they laid one cannon here and then one cannon here, and then they found palm trees that were the same size as the cannons, and they put them here, 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 and here. And so with 5 palm trees and 2 cannons, it looks like you have 7 cannons if you're just looking through binoculars from the coast, like a pretty amazing story. So the Portuguese at this time, how is this not an era of geopolitical tension? Portugal comes under the yoke of Spain. Spain is at war with the Netherlands and England. The Dutch East India Company is trying to get its own foothold in Southeast Asia because a lot of the spices that were coming in on Portuguese ships were going through the port of Antwerp, now Belgium, but was Netherlands at the time. The English were helping the Dutch because they were fellow Protestants, and the Catholics of Spain and Portugal were their enemies, and they were trying to have this, say, internecine rivalry. The Spain, once they took over Portugal's fleet, were defeated by the great Sir Francis Drake in 1590, and in 1596, a Portuguese seaman published the full directions, maps, charts, everything that allowed Western ships to come to India and parts beyond. So it is in 1604 then, amidst this Drake victory, in the lead up to the 30 Years' War, these wars between Netherlands and England, Portugal and Spain are heating up, that we get this incident, this Santa Catarina incident, where Hugo Grotius makes this argument for the freedom of navigation. And so it is in this era of geopolitical tension that Portugal decides that they have the capacity to close the Straits of Malacca, to suspend the freedom of navigation that existed from Roman times, existed from the times of the Srivijaya kings, existed from the time of a unified China, that Portugal has the capacity to suspend it, not near Portugal, but in the Straits of Malacca, off the coast of Singapore. And so a Portuguese ship is arrested by the Dutch in Singapore. The ship is then brought to Europe and sold. And Grotius makes this argument as part of his unpublished Mare Liberum, Laws of War and Peace, saying What Portugal is doing is unlawful because why? Well, we have, and I think Anand sort of slowly nods to Grotius being one of the first 12 scholars. Maybe I will make that as a joke, that Grotius himself was one of the first 12 scholars. What should you do if you are a 12 scholar? It is look for the historical practice of third world countries in developing international law. And that is really what Grotius does. He looks at the historical practice of the Asian states with the freedom of navigation and the freedom of commerce. He looks at historical Roman practice off the north coast of Africa. He looks at some of the practices, I'll say, around Italy, around Genoa and Venice. And he looks at some of the fishing practices in and around not only who was allowed to fish and where, but I'll get into this again, when fishing vessels could be arrested during times of war. So, he writes, neither Asians nor Romans ever claimed jurisdiction over the sea. Freedom of navigation and maritime trade and commerce without restriction were accepted as parts of the universal law of interstate conduct. And the reason the Dutch were able to make this argument is because by 1600, the Dutch had developed a merchant marine. They had over 10,000 ships. By 1650, it was 14,000 vessels that could be used as warships. 1650. Allegedly, they had 250,000 troops who were able to be used in this naval capacity. What is that? 2.5 lakh. Portugal at that time had 4,000. 4,000. So why is the Netherlands able to capture the ship? Why are they able to make this argument that the freedom of the seas exists? It is because they're so much stronger. They're so much more powerful. And this argument lasts for only as long as they are strong and as they are powerful. By the time they are surpassed by the English, Grotius himself has reversed this argument and is now arguing that protectionism can be availed. English authors at the time had refuted it, and they got Grotius to admit it, even though the English kings were saying things like, when a ruler might impose such levies on his subjects, he could not do so on foreigners, because the right of fishing ought everywhere to be exempt from tolls. And so the Dutch, we have the Portuguese era, the Dutch era. The Dutch throughout the 17th century were defeated in the First Dutch War of 1652. They were defeated in the Second Dutch War of 1666. They were defeated in the Third Dutch War of 1672. Is this not an era of geopolitical tension where these ideas of freedom of navigation are being questioned, this ability to have not only exclusive trade with one island in Southeast Asia, but to negotiate exclusive access to a sea route? So the Portuguese had tried it, the Dutch had tried it. The Dutch might even have had the capacity to enforce it, but it sort of disappeared when the British sort of took control, I will say, took control of everything after the defeat of Napoleon in 1815. The British with them took this freedom of navigation, this freedom of commerce. And so once the British started controlling the seas in the 19th century, freedom of commerce became, or this freedom of navigation came everywhere and sort of solidified. And this freedom of navigation, I am sort of making it out, I don't know, I think I'm making out to be a good thing, right? It is a good thing because it was practiced by all of the ancient Rome, ancient Asia. It's such a horror that Portugal could be closing off a sea lane, right? Why should you, if you are in India and you're ordering stuff on Temu from China and your cargo ship has to go through the Straits of Malacca, why should you have to worry that Portugal is at war with the Netherlands and that the war between Portugal and the Netherlands in the Straits of Malacca might impact your shipment of Temu or Shine or whatever that you're getting from China, right? But it did, of course, have these negative consequences. And some of this gets into our modern law of the sea dispute because the coastal states, and we are in if I had all of the time in the world, I would go through a little bit more the development in the 18th and 19th century, but I think I'll just go through some of the modern stuff now. I might mention one or two things, because these coastal states sort of didn't like having foreign ships, especially foreign warships, be able to get so close to their shores. And so you don't have to exclusively look because at the archipelagos, but even if you are looking at Indonesia alone, Indonesia goes from being this colonized by both the Spanish and the Dutch, and then the Spanish possessions were lost to America in the Spanish-American Wars. There is a wonderful case in the U.S. Supreme Court called a Paquet Habana about a fishing vessel off the coast of Cuba that is arrested and sold by U.S. Troops in 1898. And there is a very lengthy discussion in the court about when, why, and how, not just in 1898, but going back as far as the 1400s, so all of what we've just been talking about, when it was legal to arrest another country's fishing boats when you are at war with that country. And so there's a lot of European practice, not necessarily about this freedom of navigation as to who can close the Straits of Malacca under what circumstances, but can your fishing vessels fish in our waters, and should that be an issue if we are at war, right? Can the navies fight each other and just ignore the fishing vessels? Right? And for the most part, and if we wanted, I have a bunch of great quotes from this case. It is a 1900 U.S. Supreme Court case going through the history of vessels of fishermen being declared exempt from confiscation because of the eminently peaceful object of their humble industry and the principles of equity and humanity. How closely we want to tie this freedom of navigation with this freedom to fish. It can be pulled out in a lot of different ways, and this rights to fish, when, why, and where. Are you navigating? Is this a navigation question? Are we sort of outside navigation, but can be something very fascinating for many of you to look at, right? I should I give you guys more stuff if you want to pursue independent research, more great law of the sea topics? India is taking a larger role in IUU fishing, illegal, unregulated, unreported fishing. How far beyond India's coasts? How far into the Indian Ocean should the Indian Navy allow this IUU fishing? What are the rights that they have? Does this freedom of navigation, navigating through a passage, exist pari passu to this freedom to fish anywhere? this freedom to fish in the high seas. A lot of what you will see in these early 14th, 15th, 16th century, 17th, 18th century freedom of navigation, freedom to fish, is the wealth of the ocean is unexhaustible. And now the wealth of the ocean is in trouble. It is being exhausted. Overfishing from European fleets, from Chinese fleets, from Argentinian fleets are gobbling down and processing the fish of the Indian Ocean. How far should this freedom of navigation extend? We could do a complete another seminar. Please look at this issue. There's some of this in the Anand book itself about this subtle shift in the science of what is available in the ocean to and how that should impact. There's an Indian Ocean Tuna Commission that studies this. What are their enforcement powers? I know it is very easy to get sidetracked here, but maybe I will use this as a way to get into some of the more modern stuff, which I'll try to cover in the next 10 minutes and then open it up for questions. That sound about right? Because, right, I work at the International Maritime Law Institute. I talk about maritime law all day. I could talk about this all day. So it's tough for me to fit it into an hour, especially something that can be useful and interesting for you guys, hopefully just pointing you towards the Anand book and some of the emerging issues will be enough of a good start. And we can see, you can take any of the issues that he wrote about in 1982 and sort of apply them into today's world. So from historical times, we have the, I guess, waning British influence over maritime matters, the expanding American influence over maritime matters, and then into the these questions about how far the territorial sea should go out, how far these fishing rights should extend off the coast, how far your ability to extract minerals on the continental shelf should extend. These were all the issues at the first Law of the Sea conference in the 1950s. Those of you who have taken public international law know the continental shelf in the Germany case and seen how the court deals with the question of whether or not that became customary international law. By the time we get into the third Law of the Sea Convention, we are dealing with this expansion of the territorial sea and its impact on transit passage, as well as this question of archipelagic waters. And I guess the other major twale issue in the Law of the Sea Convention was this issue of the ocean floor of the high seas, this common heritage of mankind, the development of which Anand is very kind to cite to the great Maltese scholar Pardo. This is the Pardo Library, we have a big statue of Pardo outside. And so this common heritage of mankind question was a big twale issue. The archipelagic waters, the expansion of the territorial seas, and maybe that will get us enough into today's world, right? The convention itself was signed in 1982. It came into effect in 1994. That's still relatively recent. I guess there was another amendment, enacting amendment dealing with the seabed regime itself, and we've had a couple more fishing regimes, but the biodiversity beyond national jurisdiction regime itself just came into force last month, and so these things are constantly changing. So let's talk about a couple of these modern issues. So the Arctic, one of the issues in the Law of the Sea was about areas covered by ice most of the year. So if we look at Article 234, it says there's a little bit of a carve out for Canada and Russia. So there's all the powers that I said, that the relatively few things that the coastal states can do. They can put navigational charts, they can do scientific research, they can lay down pipeline cables, they can do offshore installations that are properly marked. Relatively minimal stuff. But in the Arctic, Article 234 says areas covered by ice by most of the year, the coastal state has some additional powers that they can take. So if you look at the map of North Canada, if you look at the map in the summer, it looks like there is a bunch of islands. If you look at the map in the winter, it is a sheet of ice. And so this issue where can you navigate through it during the summer? Is there a regime of transit passage that exists through this Canadian Arctic? Is one that was disputed as much, or used to be disputed, but now has sort of fallen by the wayside, I will say, because of this, I'm going to say, Russia issue. It is, I don't want to say it doesn't really affect India too much, but for Chinese ships going to Europe, Temu, Shine, all of this tremendous commercial value, to go through the Straits of Malacca, around India, through the Panama Canal, takes, I'm going to say, approximately 45 days. To go around the north coast of Russia takes approximately 30 days. Time is money. The ability to take your ship from China through the north when there is no ice there is a major advantage for commercial shippers who have ships that are able to comply with the polar code, and two, are safe enough to be transited through. Now, Article 234 notwithstanding, the regime of this Northern Sea route is innocent passage. You are, as long as you are 12 nautical miles away from the Russian coast, you have the right of innocent passage. Now, there are a couple of spots where there are islands off the coast, and it is safer to navigate between the mainland and the island, in which case you have transit passage through a strait used for international navigation. Now, legally, you should be able to take your cargo ship anytime where there is no ice and navigate this Northern Sea route without having to notify the Russian coast, without having to pay any of the tolls, without anything that would remind you of the Portuguese colonists outside of Malacca in the 16th century. But Russia has imposed duties. Russia imposes, they force you to notify. And we are in this weird lacuna where legally you are able to, but Russia says if you want to do this, you need to pay us a toll. Why? Well, we offer the services of the Russian icebreaking fleet. I was in the Arctic 5 or 6 years ago, and it was during the summer, so I did not know what it was like in the winter. But I would say legally you are allowed to do it, but there are a lot of things that, although are lawful, are not a good idea. And so we have this dispute between, it is really not that smart to take your ship without notifying Russia and pilot the Northern Sea route with your own icebreaker and hope that if anything goes wrong, you will be okay. Legally, you have that right, but does that freedom of navigation actually exist? Should it? Yes, but is any country, what is the word that I want to use here? I don't want to say dumb enough to try it. Even though it would be a dumb thing to do, but like American warships do freedom of navigation operations all over the world. They go into the South China Sea. They go through straits. Have they done a Northern Sea Route 1? No. No. So is this an era of geopolitical tension? Absolutely. But should there be some regime worked out? Because should you be paying Russia for search and rescue services? I think so. It is the safe and prudent thing to do, even if lawfully you are not required. And how does Russia's attitudes else in the world and their actions everywhere else in the world complicate this picture? Is a little too much, but this freedom of navigation exists, and compare it to what Portugal was doing. The other, no, I was not going to recommend another book. And likewise, any geopolitical tension over Greenland does not matter for freedom of navigation, right? You can navigate around Greenland freely regardless of who owns it. So I'm not even going to mention it. Straits of Hormuz are a little more complicated, right? Where do I have my notes on this? Of course, a warship is a dangerous apparatus, but more dangerous than the warship is the weapon that can sink the warship in the depths of the sea. This is a major strait used for international navigation, of which innocent passage exists. Merchant ships carrying oil from Kuwait out of the Gulf into the Indian Ocean, or from India to Kuwait to get on a train, right? There was some major, this was one of the major economic networks planned to get to Europe, right? Load up the cargo in Gujarat, send it to Kuwait, put it on a train. And if you cannot go through the Strait of Hormuz because national security of the Iranian state, do we have freedom of navigation? And our last one, because I am up against my time here, this issue of lethal kinetic strikes in the Caribbean and their impact on the freedom of navigation. So who are our three main threats in this present era of geopolitical tension to freedom of navigation? I would say Russia and the Northern Sea Route. Absolutely. No freedom of navigation up there. But that one, I might be willing to allow it because it is such a bad idea to go on your own. Iran in the Straits of Hormuz, right? You can't be closing off these straits. It's, we are in part 2 of UNCLOS here. And then our last one has to be the US and these kinetic strikes in the Caribbean. This is a clear violation of the laws of war, not even going into the, there are rules, right? After 9/11, there was a question of boarding ships that were suspected to have weapons of mass destruction, nuclear weapons, big bombs on them, right? And even then it was like, call the flag state, get the support of the flag state, and then you can board it. What happens if the flag state doesn't answer the call within 4 hours? You can board it. And so to just blow ships up is beyond what we have seen in self-defense, right? Are we in a international armed conflict between states? No, we are not, right? Are we in a non-international armed conflict between a organized non-state group? Well, you have to make this a very strained definition to even suggest that self-defense might be available, that the laws of war should apply. It involves, you guys probably saw that the Americans kidnapped the president of Venezuela a few weeks ago, right? And so we obviously had these disputes about the president of Venezuela, and as a result, or the, common gripes that Venezuelans had against him led to millions of Venezuelans immigrating to the US in the last 5 years, right? And we want to say, both at the same time, we want to encourage Venezuelans to not live under Maduro, but these Venezuelans coming to the US is obviously something sinister and is indicative of an invasion, a gang invasion, a drug cartel. And then, of course, the up to 1 million, somewhere between 500,000 and 1 million Americans who've died of drug overdose have no free will in this manner. They are being killed in the same way that a weapon goes off. The drug somehow automatically, without any free will of the user, uses them and dies. It is a very, very strained theory. And even now our president is boasting about, right, you don't want to be a fishing boat in the Caribbean. What impact is this having in this freedom of navigation, this hard fought and ancient principle of international maritime law? I have a bunch more notes of this, but I'm up against time here, so I hope that this ancient context that Grotius was able to discover about Roman and Asian practice and then applied to the era of geopolitical tension in the 15th, 16th century of colonial wars and wars between Catholics and Protestants, the 30 Years' War, this colonial age in Europe that was fought out in Southeast Asia, can inform some of these modern conflicts in the Arctic, in the Caribbean, and in the Middle East. I am happy to answer your questions, not just now, but if you email me in the future, if you want to do further research on maritime law in India, Twale approaches to the law of the sea, any of these topics. And thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you so much, sir, for providing a detailed understanding on the said topic. So we have a huge round of applause from our students. Sir, though they might have a couple of questions, would it be okay for you to take up?
For me to?
To take up the questions?
Yeah, absolutely. It is
Sure. So,
probably
yeah.
much
So if our
easier for
students
me
have,
to read them if they are typed into the chat.
so
And
they
then I
will,
can,
they have a mic. They already have a mic, so they would
sure.
be addressing you online itself.
And let me hear 3 or 4 questions and I will write them down and then I will
Definitely.
answer them together. All right, go ahead.
Students, do we have questions for sir from our end?
Good evening, sir. Am I audible?
Yes, go ahead.
Thank you for such an insightful and gripping session. I just wanted you to elaborate more on geopolitical conflicts that can impact principles of navigation in respect of UNCLOS.
I will try, okay.
Thank you, sir.
Yes, keep ask 3 or 4 and I will get to them all together.
Yes, sir. Are you able to hear me?
Yes, go ahead.
Thank you, first of all, for the lesson. And secondly, my question is, what do you have to say about stateless ethno-linguistic groups such as Rohingyas and how maritime law is taking them into consideration?
We would take up a last question for sir now. So last question.
Good evening, sir.
Hello.
We saw that there was an international event, big geopolitical event happened 2 months back, around 10th December 2025. US seized an oil tanker near the seas of Venezuela, which was not in its territory as well. So how does international law provides for the US's action?
Got it.
That was the US action justified under the international maritime law?
Got it. All very good questions. Any more? Was there one more up in the front?
That's it, sir. We would take up these 3.
So the answer to the question about the Rohingyas and about seizing the Venezuelans are oddly similar. Freedom of navigation is something that is afforded to states, not afforded to ships. And so ships fly flags, and those flags are the flag states have the initial jurisdictional responsibilities for things that occur. And this problem of taking the last question first, of a ship that says they are flying one flag, and then when asked about it, shows documents of another flag, or you call that flag state and say, can you give us some information about this vessel? And they say, what vessel? We've never heard of this ship. And so when there is no flag state, there is no first level of protection. And stateless ships under UNCLOS are able to be boarded, are able to be searched, are able to, and so you have this whole other regime when there is no flag state. And so to say, right, this ship itself that was a Venezuelan tanker or had oil from Venezuela, right, it was, I'm trying to remember, I remember seeing it when it happened. It was flying the flag of the Cayman Islands, and then they called, or the Comoros, and they called Comoros and they said, do you know about this ship? And they said, what ship? We've never heard of it. And then they said, oh, well, actually we have Russian registration. And they call it, it was this whole thing here. And so this question of the shadow fleet is a tough one. People at the IMO are dealing with it. We had a couple of lectures on it last week. Let's see, I thought I was going to have, I think we are in Article 10, I want to say, we're definitely in Part 7. Let me just look through. I think we are in Article 106. Because we are talking about no, I'm not. A ship, this is Article 92, a ship which sails under the flags of two or more states, using them according to convenience, may not claim any of the nationalities in question with respect to any other state, and may be assimilated to a ship without nationality. Right? And so this is the problem here. And again, great topic for research, flags of convenience and the shadow fleet. It has been cleaned up a lot, but is still a problem. Similarly, with stateless groups, UNCLOS does a lot for landlocked states, but it is still an international instrument that is negotiated between states, between state parties. And the few powers that exist in the contiguous zone, and for that we would be in, we are beyond the territorial sea. We are in, sorry, is some immigration control. Where is it? Sorry, I can't immediately find it. And so I'm not sure exactly sure which, it is not, I don't think there is this mention of the statelets or what it could be, but great topic for research if you want to develop it as well. I know informally, at least with the Arctic, a lot of Arctic law now is negotiated in the Arctic Council, and the Arctic Council does a great job of bringing in the stateless ethno-linguistic groups who live in the Arctic to be part of their lawmaking process. I don't know if a similar process exists at something like the Indian Ocean Tuna Commission or even through the Bay of Bengal, but it would be a great thing to look at. And then about just geopolitical conflicts, UNCLOS is a peacetime convention. Even UNCLOS itself was negotiated in the height of the Cold War between the US and the USSR. It is a remarkable agreement between these two warring factions about how to successfully negotiate. It's one of the reasons I love maritime law. Is it is still one of the area where there was the most international agreement. So it again is a peacetime convention and is designed to keep the peace with states to prevent this type of naval conflict, so that there are not issues with fighting over who has access to international straits, fighting over who is able to have exclusive trade rights in certain areas of the world, fighting over who is, I mean, we have other non-military ways to fight over, even today or just last week, this issue of who controls the port, who controls the Panama Canal. It was previously being run by a Chinese country, which was unacceptable to the Americans. And so the Americans asked their bitter enemies, the Danish, who they are fighting over about Greenland. They asked the very large global Danish company, Maersk. You guys have heard of Maersk. I think Maersk was the ship in the Captain Phillips movie as well. Was that a Maersk ship? I think so. Asked the Danish to step in and administer the passage through the Panama Canal. So even in this time of dispute over Greenland, they were able to come together and help kick out this Chinese company from running the Panama Canal. But it is still a peacetime convention, as it was meant to be. And even, I mean, Annex 5 and the Part 15 is all about peaceful settlement of international disputes, compulsory procedures with arbitration, general provisions, final provisions. All of these are about peaceful settlement of maritime disputes. So it is an important part of UNCLOS, and UNCLOS is again you will often see a lot of treaties that say, your state can sign this treaty and say that, you can have an exemption to Part 9, exemption to Part 11, exemption to Part 12. UNCLOS is all or nothing. You take everything. And part of what you take is peaceful settlement of international maritime disputes.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir, for patiently addressing to the questions raised by our students. And with this, we come to the conclusion of today's session. And I would like to invite Dr. Sneha Shukla ma'am, Vice Director and Professor at Faculty of Law, GLS University, who is an alumni of IIM Ahmedabad with over 20 years of academic excellence. Ma'am has significantly contributed in research, institutional development, and legal education. So, ma'am, over to you for the vote of thanks.
A very good evening, sir. On behalf of Faculty of Law, GLS University, it is my privilege to propose vote of thanks for today's enriching session. As aptly said, the freedom of the seas is the lifeblood of global commerce and peaceful coexistence. Today's deliberation truly reflected the depth and relevance of that thought. I extend my sincere appreciation to Dr. Daniel Stein, lecturer at the International Maritime Law Institute, Malta, for his illuminating address on freedom of navigation in the era of geopolitical tensions. His nuanced analysis not only clarified the foundational legal principles governing navigational freedoms, but also thoughtfully examined the complexities emerging from contemporary geopolitical realities. The discussion reinforced the indispensable role of maritime law in sustaining international trade, ensuring collective security, and fostering cooperation among nations. I would like to express my heartfelt gratitude to Sri Sudhir Nanavati sir, President, GLS University, for his inspiring leadership and unwavering support. I extend my sincere gratitude to Dr. Chandni Kapadia ma'am, Executive Director, GLS University, for her constant guidance and encouragement. Their vision and strength truly form the foundation of every initiative we undertake. I also acknowledge Dr. Dharmesh Shah, Provost, GLS University, for his continued support, to Mr. Shashank Shah sir, CFO, GLS University, and all the office bearers. Special thanks to our own Dr. Mayuri Pandya ma'am, Dean, Faculty of Law, whose foresight have shaped this international speaker series into a vibrant global platform. My appreciation also extends to our faculty members, coordinators, student volunteers, and participants whose keen involvement, insightful queries, and active interaction enriched the discourse and made the session intellectually engaging. As we advance in this scholarly journey, we eagerly await day 4, in which Ms. Natalia Ulzora, Chief Operating Officer at Global Network for the Study of Human Rights and Environment, USA, will address on AI and its intersection with environmental law. With gratitude to everyone who contributed to today's meaningful exchange, I look forward to your continued presence in Global Juris Connect, a scholarly convergence international speaker series. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. With sincere gratitude to Professor Daniel Stein and to the faculty members and all the participants, we end our session for the day today. See you all tomorrow. Thank you.
Bye-bye, sir.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Please
bye-bye.
be in touch. Send me an email if you have any questions or want to follow up. Cheers.
Sure, sir. Thank you.
Bye, sir.